Okay guys, so this is a quick little summary of our transpiration lab. A lot of this was hard for you to answer because I ended up doing the lab for you in the essence of time, and I kind of forgot that and didn't give you some of the background information that you needed to do this. So the purpose of this lab was to figure out what factors affect the rate of transpiration in a plant. Remember, transpiration is just the act of losing water through the leaves. So what factors contribute to plants losing water via transpiration? So to adequately measure this, the easiest way to do this is to measure the weight of the plant. So your dependent variable in this situation is just how much that plant weighs. And remember, I took weights on 3 separate days. So all the plants got the same treatment in the sense that they were watered once prior to the start of the investigation, and they all got the same amount of water, and then they were not watered again on, well, ever, to be honest. I bought the same type of plant for every single group. Every group had 4 plants to use, and so everything's the same. The type of plant's the same, the amount of soil it has is the same, the plant pot that it was found in was the same, and they all got the same amount of water at the very beginning of the lab and then were never watered again. So those were your constants. Your control plants didn't get any special type of treatment other than they sat in my room and got exposed to whatever conditions were in my room. Now, some of you worked with plants that were exposed to light constantly. So the difference is your plants were under a light source. Even when the lights in my room were turned off, your plants remained under that light source the entire time. Some of you had plants that were exposed to wind. So all of those plants were kept the same distance away from a fan. That fan was turned on and it stayed on for the duration of the lab. Then some of you had plants that were placed in the dark. So I just stuck them in a closet that I don't go into, to be honest, at all. And that's where they stayed for the duration of the lab. Then some of you had plants that were affected by humidity. So I sprayed the same amount of water in a large Ziploc bag. Each plant got its own Ziploc bag. It was placed in that Ziploc bag and sealed, and then also placed in that darker closet to maintain humidity levels. I measured the plant's weight every 2 days, so 3 separate times, every other day, if you will. And that's how you got those numbers that you were using for your graphing and for your calculations. So as far as your calculations go, all of that is coming from your class data table. So you're just pulling off the numbers based on what that data table shows you, and also just kind of what you know about plants in general. For the analysis questions, I only need you to graph and talk about, actually, you're graphing the class data, but for the analysis questions, I need you to really only talk about your particular variable. Now, should you kind of be able to look at the other variables and know what's happening? Yeah, you should. But a lot of that is straight off of your data table. Like, for example, when you look at the numbers, you should be able to tell that the humidity plants didn't lose as much water as, say, the wind plant. So if we were looking for a factor that severely affected transpiration rate, then wind pulled more water out of the plants than humidity. So little things like that. Now, in terms of the water potential, remember, we've talked about this when we did osmosis, when we did diffusion. It's literally water just moving from high concentration to low concentration, but I want you to talk about water potential. Remember, the more water those plants are losing through their leaves, the more they are pulling water out of the soil, which is one of the reasons that plants that lost a lot of water from their leaves were pulling even more water out of the soil, so they were lighter in terms of mass. Whereas plants that were holding onto their water a little bit better didn't need to pull as much water out of the soil, so they in turn were heavier because they were holding onto their water a little bit better. Now, for the question that talks about calculating the rate of transpiration, because everything else was kept constant, and because the only thing manipulated would be things that affected water loss, If your plant lost mass, it's because it lost water. We didn't pull leaves off, we didn't do anything like that. The only thing that the plant could have lost in all of these setups was water. So when you're thinking of calculating your rate of transpiration, you're literally calculating how much water per day, if you will, that plant was losing. So kind of think about that when you're explaining how to calculate that transpiration rate or how to set up that transpiration rate calculation. Okay, and then on the very last question where it talks about leaves having two sides and should you have to double your calculation to figure out the surface area, I need you to think very strategically about how water leaves a leaf. Water only leaves through the stomata. So now maybe the question you need to ask yourself is, do the majority of plants have stomata on the bottom of their leaves and on the top of their leaves? If they only have stomata on the bottom, it means they're only losing water from the bottom. We only care about one side of the leaf. But if they have stomata at the top, then they could be losing water from the top as well. So that might be something you do a little bit of research on and then make a decision. Okay, so at this point you should have enough to work out the kinks in this lab. I didn't write a lot down for you, but I said a lot. So feel free to rewind and listen to the parts that you need, okay? Have a good weekend, y'all. Bye.